A 9-year-old girl interrupted a live television show to report her stepmother. When she handed an envelope to the host, the entire studio froze. No one could believe what had just been revealed. The afternoon sun pierced through the mansion's stained glass windows, painting the marble floor with golden and reddish tones, reminiscent of an impressionist painting. Valerie played with her favorite doll on the Persian rug in the main room, while watching her father Alexander work on his laptop by the fireplace. It was a common scene in that house. The 9-year-old girl always sought to be near her father, even when he was busy with his professional commitments. The successful businessman would occasionally look up from his work to smile at his daughter, a silent gesture that carried all the love and dedication he nurtured for her since her mother had passed away years ago. The complicity between the two was evident even in the smallest gestures, like when he surreptitiously kicked a chocolate that had escaped from his jacket pocket in her direction. The sound of high heels on the floor announced the arrival of Catherine, Alexander's new wife. Her presence subtly altered the atmosphere of the room, not abruptly, but like a cold breeze seeping under a closed door. She approached her husband with studied steps, her perfectly manicured fingers sliding over his shoulders in a calculated display of affection. "Darling, the governess just informed me that dinner is served. Why don't we put work aside for a moment and enjoy some family time?" she suggested, her melodious voice perfectly masking her irritation at seeing Valerie so close to her father, as always. At the dining table, the family gathered in a ritual that seemed straight out of a television commercial. Catherine served everyone with an impeccable smile, her smooth and precise gestures like those of a veteran actress. The perfectly arranged salad, the carefully selected red wine, the strategically positioned lit candles, everything was part of her meticulous performance as a devoted wife. The aroma of food filled the environment, but could not mask the underlying tension that hung in the air like an invisible approaching storm cloud. "Alexander, my love, I've been thinking a lot about our little Valerie's future," Catherine began, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey as she poured more wine into her husband's glass. "You know that boarding school the Mendonca's daughter attends? They say it's simply extraordinary. The girls come out of there prepared for the world's best universities. Wouldn't it be perfect for her?" The suggestion hung in the air like a bomb about to explode, as Valerie froze with her fork halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide, fixed on her father. Alexander set down his utensils with a delicacy that contrasted with the firmness in his voice. "Catherine, we've discussed this. Valerie is not going to any boarding school. Her education is excellent at her current school, and more importantly, she's happy here. This matter is closed." The decision in his voice left no room for discussion, but the gleam in Catherine's eyes revealed that this battle was far from over. Her smile remained intact, though something dark crossed her gaze for a fraction of a second. The rest of the dinner unfolded in a heavy silence, broken only by the clinking of utensils against the fine porcelain. Valerie played with the food on her plate, relieved by her father's firm stance, but uneasy about something she couldn't explain. The weight of that conversation still hung in the air, like an invisible shadow suffocating any attempt at levity. The girl, usually talkative and lively, kept her eyes lowered, pushing the food around her plate with her fork with no real interest in eating. Whenever she looked up, she was met with Catherine's serene and calculated expression, her impassive face as if she were still calculating her next moves. Alexander, in turn, finished his plate with the studied tranquility of someone who didn't want to fuel any more friction, but his rigid posture betrayed the tension that ran beneath the surface. He picked up his wineglass and swirled the liquid slowly, before taking another sip, his gaze lost at some undefined point on the table. The decision to keep Valerie there was made, but he knew Catherine wouldn't give up so easily. His wife always played the long game. Catherine sipped her wine, her calculating eyes alternating between father and daughter, like a predator studying its prey. The light reflected off the crystal glass, creating small beams of color on the immaculately white linen tablecloth. Each of her movements was meticulous, the way she touched the utensil with delicacy, how she crossed her legs with studied naturalness, how she let her fingertips glide along the stem of the glass as she brought it to her lips. But her gaze betrayed her mind in full operation. When Alexander brought the glass to his lips once more, she watched him with peculiar attention, and an almost imperceptible smile formed at the corner of her perfectly painted lips. That same night, after the tense dinner, Catherine remained in the living room, her nails tapping on the crystal glass as she watched Alexander and Valerie through the half-open door of the library. Father and daughter were engrossed in their nightly reading routine, sharing laughs and comments about the story they were reading together. The seemingly innocent scene provoked in Catherine a silent fury that grew with each passing second, like poison spreading through her veins. The cruel truth finally crystallized in her mind. No matter how much time passed, how many perfect dinners she prepared, or how many fake smiles she distributed, she would never occupy the first place in Alexander's heart or priorities. In her private office, located in the west wing of the mansion, Catherine meticulously searched through her husband's financial documents. The dim light from the lampshade cast unsettling shadows on her once angelic face, now contorted into a mask of greed and determination. Her delicate hands glided over papers revealing a fortune greater than she had imagined: properties, investments, accounts in various banks. All that empire could be hers, she thought, as a sinister plan began to take shape in her mind. The inheritance she so coveted was there within her grasp, but there was an obstacle. She needed to get rid of Alexander first, and then find a way to permanently remove Valerie. The plan began to be executed on the following night. During another family dinner, Catherine moved through the dining room with the grace of a ballerina, serving the dishes with her usual charming smile. Her eyes, however, held a different glimmer as she personally served the wine to Alexander, a special red that she assured she had chosen especially for the occasion. "It's an exceptional vintage, my love. I'm sure you'll appreciate the peculiar notes of this wine," she commented, her melodious voice perfectly masking the anxiety she felt as she watched her husband bring the glass to his lips. The meal was proceeding normally when Alexander began to show the first signs of discomfort. His forehead started to sweat, and he discreetly loosened his tie, as if seeking more air. Valerie was the first to notice something was wrong, her childish intuition catching the sudden change in her father's countenance. "Dad, are you okay? You look pale," the girl asked, her voice laden with genuine concern. Alexander tried to smile to reassure his daughter, but a wave of pain shot through his body, causing him to lean slightly over the table. Catherine played her role with mastery, rushing to her husband's side with an expression of concern so well rehearsed that it could deceive even the most discerning observer. "Alexander, dear, what are you feeling?" she asked, gently placing one hand on his shoulder, while the other discreetly removed the wineglass from the table, ensuring no evidence remained. Her eyes, however, could not completely hide the satisfaction at seeing her plan begin to take effect. The businessman tried to get up, but his legs seemed not to respond properly to commands. The marble floor beneath his feet became an unstable surface, spinning and trembling as if the world around him were crumbling. Cold sweat trickled down his temples, sticky moisture accumulating on the collar of his already rumpled dress shirt. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, seeking support, but the grip was not enough to prevent an involuntary tremor from running through his arms. "It's nothing, just a passing indisposition," he muttered, forcing a smile in an attempt to reassure his daughter. However, his voice, once firm and imposing, now came out hoarse, scratchy and trembling, betraying the gravity of his condition. His eyes blinked a few times, trying to focus on Valerie's features, but the image of the girl seemed to oscillate, blurred by the dizziness that threatened to consume him entirely. Valerie watched the scene with wide, frightened eyes, her small hands gripping the cutlery tightly, as if the pressure against her fingers could drive away the growing fear inside her. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest, and her breathing quickened without her realizing it. She had never seen her father in this way before. He was always strong, confident, an impenetrable wall, but now in that instant he seemed fragile, vulnerable. "Dad, you don't look well," she whispered, her voice laden with innocent, genuine concern. Her gaze shifted towards her stepmother, who stood by the businessman's side, her immaculate expression of concern sounding strangely rehearsed. Catherine slid one hand gently over her husband's shoulder, her cold skin contrasting with the feverish heat emanating from his body. "Dear, perhaps we should call a doctor," she suggested, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey. Her demeanor was that of a devoted wife, but her eyes, those meticulously made-up and expressionless eyes, reflected no real concern. Every minute that passed brought her closer to her goal. The pains that tore through Alexander's body intensified with each passing minute, transforming what had begun as a mild discomfort into a silent agony that consumed him from within. His fingers gripped the edge of the dining table with enough force to turn his knuckles white as he tried to maintain his composure in front of his little Valerie. Sweat poured down his forehead in large drops, and his vision began to blur, turning his daughter's concerned features into indistinct blotches before his eyes. In his confused mind, he attributed this sudden malaise to a passing indisposition, perhaps work stress or accumulated fatigue, never suspecting that each sip of the wine served by Catherine brought him closer to the end. Valerie watched her father with wide, terrified eyes, her childish heart beating erratically in her chest as she witnessed his transformation before her eyes. Her instinct screamed that something terrible was happening, but her 9-year-old mind could not fully process the gravity of the situation. Tears began to form in her eyes as she saw the man who had always been her safe haven, her protector, her hero, succumb to an invisible force that attacked him from within. "Dad, please, let's call a doctor." "You look so pale," she pleaded, her voice trembling with the fear that was beginning to overtake her. Catherine circled around Alexander like a vulture, her delicate hands occasionally touching his shoulder or forehead in a studied display of concern. Each of her gestures was meticulously calculated to portray the image of a dedicated and loving wife, while her eyes shone with a macabre satisfaction at seeing her plan unfold perfectly before her. "Dear, perhaps we should indeed call a doctor," she suggested, her melodious voice carrying a false concern that only Valerie, in her perceptive innocence, seemed able to detect. "You don't seem well at all." The businessman tried to get up, determined to show that he was fine, that there was no reason for such a fuss. However, his legs faltered, and he had to lean heavily on the table to avoid falling. The world around him began to spin in a whirlwind of distorted colors and sounds, while a growing pressure in his chest made it increasingly difficult for him to breathe. "It's not necessary. I just need to rest a bit," he muttered, his normally strong voice now little more than a hoarse whisper. In his characteristic stubbornness, he refused to admit the severity of his condition, unaware that every minute of hesitation could cost him his life. The dining room environment, once cozy and familiar, now seemed suffocating and threatening. The shadows cast by the candles danced on the walls like gloomy specters, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. The aroma of food still present on the table mingled with the metallic smell of the cold sweat running down Alexander's face, creating a nauseating atmosphere that only intensified his discomfort. Valerie remained paralyzed in her chair, her small hands clutching the napkin tightly, as she watched helplessly as her father deteriorated before her eyes. The pangs of pain in Alexander's stomach increased in intensity, as if thousands of needles were piercing him from within. His mind began to become foggy, and the sounds around him seemed to come from far away, as if he were submerging in deep, dark waters. The angelic face of his daughter, now stained by silent tears, was the last clear image he registered before his legs finally gave way. His heavy body slid from the chair in slow motion, while Catherine watched with an almost imperceptible smile on her perfectly painted lips, knowing that her plan was about to come to fruition. The first light of morning seeped through the curtains of the master bedroom, where Alexander had spent a turbulent night of restless sleep and persistent aches. His face, normally vigorous and well-rested, bore a frightening pallor that contrasted with the deep circles that had formed during the early hours. The silk sheets were drenched in sweat, and his body trembled slightly even under several layers of blankets. The maid, upon entering the room for the morning ritual of opening the curtains, could not contain an exclamation of surprise at the deplorable state of her master, immediately running to call Catherine. In the stifling stillness of the room, Catherine performed her most convincing act yet. Her delicate hands adjusted the pillows with false dedication, while her melodious voice whispered words of comfort that rang hollow in the heavy air of the room. "My love, we must take you to the hospital immediately. Your condition is worsening by the hour," she declared, knowing full well that Alexander, in his characteristic stubbornness, would refuse the suggestion. As expected, he shook his head negatively, his voice now no more than a hoarse whisper. "It's not necessary. I just need to rest a little more. I have an important meeting this afternoon." Valerie, who had spent the night awake worrying about her father, slipped into the room as soon as she heard voices. Her swollen eyes widened at the sight of her father's condition, and she ran to the side of the bed, her small hands clutching his in desperation. "Dad, please, let's go to the doctor. You're very sick," she pleaded, her voice choked with fear. Alexander tried to smile to reassure his daughter, but the gesture turned into a grimace of pain as another wave of agony swept through his body. The hours dragged on like an eternity as Alexander's condition visibly deteriorated. Catherine maintained her calculated vigil by the bedside, occasionally leaving the room to make hushed calls on her cell phone, her face a mask of studied concern that never reached her cold eyes. The maid and other household staff moved silently through the corridors, exchanging worried glances each time another groan of pain echoed through the walls of the mansion. The sun was beginning to set when the inevitable happened. The room was bathed in an orange haze when Alexander suffered a violent seizure, his body arching on the bed as strangled sounds escaped his throat. Valerie, who had been forced to remain in her own room, heard the sudden commotion and ran down the hallways, her small heart threatening to burst in her chest. Upon reaching her parents' bedroom door, she was barred by Catherine, who held her firmly by the shoulders, preventing her from witnessing her father's final moments. The minutes that followed were a blur of movement and raised voices. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the mansion's vast corridors, mingling with the nervous clatter of abandoned dishes on the table. Staff members scurried back and forth, exchanging panicked looks, murmuring words that were lost in the whirlwind of despair. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut, as if the very foundations of the house trembled before the inevitable. The strong scent of Catherine's perfume mingled with the faint metallic odor of the cold sweat that beaded Alexander's pale skin. His once robust and imposing body now lay sprawled on the bed like a puppet without strings, its muscles unable to respond. The room, illuminated only by a yellowish bedside lamp, cast long, distorted shadows on the walls, as if the very darkness of the moment was spreading into every corner of the space. Outside, the distant wail of an ambulance sounded like a belated omen, a somber melody that would serve no purpose. The call for emergency had been made, but there was no urgency that could save him. When the doctor finally arrived at the mansion, accompanied by a paramedic carrying a first aid kit that would never be used, the dense silence had already settled in. Alexander had departed. His body lay motionless on the bed, his expression frozen between pain and shock. The once agile fingers that had so often held a wineglass with elegance or signed contracts of great importance now rested inert on the rumpled sheets. Catherine, in her masterful performance, collapsed in tears into the doctor's arms, her sobs echoing through the vastness of the room like a rehearsed funeral chant. Tears streamed down her face without smudging her flawless makeup, and her hand trembled slightly as she covered her lips, a gesture of pure theatricality. On the other side of the locked door, Valerie screamed and pounded the wood with her tiny fists, the force of her childish grief reverberating down the hallway. "Daddy, Daddy!" Her high-pitched voice broke between sobs, her throat burning, but she did not stop. The terror cutting through her chest was greater than any physical pain. Her entire world was crumbling in a single fateful night, and all she wanted was to wake up from this nightmare. The day of the funeral dawned overcast, as if the very sky shared in the mourning that hung over the mansion. In the grand hall prepared for the ceremony, Catherine circulated among the guests like a lead actress in her grand moment. Her impeccably chosen black dress, the lace veil partially covering her face, the controlled sobs at precise moments, all meticulously calculated to create the image of the inconsolable widow. Her eyes, though rimmed with tears that never reached her heart, shone with a contained satisfaction as she received condolences from those present, especially from Alexander's most important business partners. Valerie watched everything from a corner of the hall, her little hands tightly clutching the pendant her father had given her on her last birthday. Her red eyes, from so much crying, did not miss a single movement of Catherine's, and something in her childish heart screamed that there was something profoundly wrong with that display of suffering. The way her stepmother occasionally checked her reflection on mirrored surfaces, the way her trembling voice gained firmness when discussing practical matters with the family's lawyer, every detail fed Valerie's growing certainty that she was witnessing a cruel charade. In the week following the funeral, Catherine's true nature began to reveal itself as a mask slowly sliding off her face. She took control of the mansion with frightening efficiency, dismissing old and loyal employees, reorganizing entire rooms, and most importantly, taking possession of Alexander's office. The important documents that once occupied the drawers of the mahogany desk began to disappear, replaced by new papers bearing only her signature. The empire that Alexander had built over decades was being subtly transferred to the greedy hands of his widow. Little Valerie, in her brave innocence, tried to alert the authorities. One afternoon, while Catherine was busy with the lawyer, she managed to escape the watchful eye of the new governess and walked alone to the nearest police station. With tears in her eyes, she tried to explain her suspicions to the officer on duty. "My father never got sick. Never. And after he drank the wine she served, he started feeling unwell. She's lying, pretending to be sad, but I know she's not." Her words, though laden with truth, sounded like the delusion of a traumatized child to the adult's ears. The officer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, merely sighed and patted her head a few times before calling Catherine to fetch her. Minutes later, the officer receives Catherine. "Ma'am, your stepdaughter is sitting there. You know how children are at that age. especially after such a big trauma, he explained, casting an understanding look at Catherine, who quickly assumed her concerned stepmother pose. "Oh, my little one, I was so worried. You know you shouldn't go out alone," she exclaimed, her sweet voice masking the fury that Valerie could see boiling in her eyes. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere seemed different, almost unreal. The corridors, which once echoed with the soft voices of the servants and her father's firm footsteps, were now plunged into an oppressive silence. The delicate aroma of fresh flowers, always arranged in elegant vases, mingled with a faint smell of wood wax, a detail Valerie had never noticed before. But that night, everything seemed different, strange, out of place, as if the entire house was whispering a truth that no one else wanted to hear. She watched Catherine move through the corridors, as if she had always been the true owner of that place. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the floor, a sound that had once gone unnoticed, but now sounded like the cold echo of her victory. The woman walked with impeccable posture, studied gestures, each movement laden with false serenity. Her expression was one of absolute mastery, and the way she dismissed the servants with sharp looks made it clear that nothing would escape her control. Valerie felt increasingly alone and powerless. Her chest tightened with a pain she could not yet name, but that burned deep, as if she had been torn from a safe world and thrown into a universe where no one else saw what she saw. The walls that once held happy memories now seemed silent witnesses to an injustice that no one else could see. Every hanging painting, every meticulously polished piece of furniture, every corner of that house seemed a cruel reminder of what had been lost. In her room, she sat on the bed, pulling the teddy bear her father had given her and pressing it against her chest. The familiar scent of the fabric brought a flicker of comfort, but it was not enough to dispel the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She closed her eyes, allowing a single tear to roll down her cheek before quickly wiping it away. She didn't want to cry. She didn't want to feel weak. At that moment, she vowed to herself that she would uncover the truth, even if no one believed her, no matter what she had to do, no matter how long she had to wait. Her father was no longer there to protect her, but she wouldn't let his absence be forgotten. What she didn't know was that her childlike determination would soon be put to the test in ways she could never have imagined. Night had fallen over the mansion like a heavy cloak of darkness, bringing with it that peculiar silence that seems to amplify every little noise. Valerie, unable to sleep, watched the shadows that danced on her ceiling, projected by the branches of the garden trees swaying in the night breeze. Her room, once a haven of comfort and security, now seemed too big, too empty without her father's reassuring presence, who used to appear every night to tell stories and kiss her goodnight. The silent tears streaming down her face were mute witnesses to a pain too great for her childlike heart to bear. It was then that a different sound cut through the silence of the night, the distant echo of high heels clicking against the marble floor of the hallway. Valerie immediately recognized the characteristic sound of Catherine's footsteps, which seemed more hurried than usual. Curiosity overcame fear, and the girl silently slid out of her bed, her bare feet making no noise as they touched the cold floor. With her heart pounding, she approached her bedroom door, purposely left ajar by the governess earlier. Through the crack in the door, Valerie could see Catherine pacing back and forth in the hallway, her cell phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in a low, conspiratorial tone. The dim light from the hallway lamp cast sinister shadows across her stepmother's face, highlighting the expression of cruelty that now took over her features, without any trace of the mask of kindness she usually wore during the day. The words that followed made Valerie's blood run cold. Yes, everything is going according to plan. The will has already been altered. The fortune is practically secured. Now I just need to get rid of the brat. No, I can't send her to a regular boarding school. She knows too much. I need something more definitive. The following morning, Valerie ran desperately to the kitchen, where Mrs. Martha, the cook who had worked for her family for over 20 years, was preparing breakfast. The words she had heard the night before still echoed in her mind like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. With tears in her eyes and a trembling voice, the girl clutched the woman's apron. "Mrs. Martha, please, I need help. I heard Catherine on the phone last night. She wants to get rid of me, like she did with my father." The cook, who had always been so affectionate, visibly paled and stepped back, avoiding looking directly at the child as she mumbled, "Child, don't say such things. Your stepmother is a very respectable lady." Desperate for rejection, Valerie sought refuge with gardener Anthony, who tended the rose bushes her father had loved so much. With a broken heart, she told him about her suspicions, about the wine that fateful night, about the phone conversation. The man, whose calloused hands trembled as he pruned the roses, merely shook his head. "I'm sorry, little one. I have 5 children to feed. I can't get involved in this. Mrs. Catherine, she has a lot of power now." His eyes revealed a mixture of fear and guilt as he turned his back, pretending to be too busy with his work to continue the conversation. One by one, all the employees of the mansion dodged the girl's pleas for help. The governess pretended not to hear. The maid suddenly became too busy, and even the driver, who always played with her, could now barely look her in the eye. Fear hung over the servants like a dense, suffocating cloud, fueled by the rumors of those who had already been summarily dismissed for displeasing the new lady of the house. Meanwhile, Catherine moved her pieces with the precision of an experienced chess player, presenting everyone with perfectly forged documents that proved Valerie's enrollment in a prestigious boarding school abroad. The truth, however, was much darker than anyone could have imagined. On a particularly cold afternoon, Catherine led Valerie to the attic of the mansion, her hand firmly gripping the girl's arm as they climbed the creaky stairs. The environment, which previously served only to store old furniture and dusty memories, had been transformed into an improvised prison. A small single bed, a rudimentary bathroom hidden behind an old screen, and a window too high to reach were now Valerie's entire world. "This will be your new room, dear," Catherine announced, her cruel smile illuminated by the faint light seeping through the dirty window. "Consider yourself on an extended vacation. After all, everyone believes you're at an excellent boarding school abroad, enjoying a first-class education." Her laughter echoed through the attic walls like the sound of claws scratching metal as she headed for the door. "Don't worry, someone will come to bring you your meals. Eventually." With a sharp movement, she closed the heavy wooden door, and the sound of the key turning in the lock sealed Valerie's fate in her new prison. In the stifling silence of the attic, Valerie huddled in a corner, clutching her knees tightly as if that gesture could protect her from the oppressive darkness around her. Tears streamed freely down her face, tracing damp paths on her dirty skin, her breath coming in short, silent sobs. The stale, heavy air filled her nostrils with the strong smell of aged wood and mold, making each breath an uncomfortable effort. The accumulated dust on the rough floor rose with every movement, irritating her already red and swollen eyes. She blinked repeatedly, trying to dispel the stinging sensation, but it seemed to worsen with every second. The small space was filled with old boxes, haphazardly stacked as if they had been thrown there and forgotten by time. Old fabrics and furniture covered with faded sheets formed ghostly silhouettes in the dim light, entering through the small, dirty window. Through the dusty glass, Valerie could see the sky turning shades of orange and purple, a spectacle that, in other times, would have been admired with delight. Now, however, that sight brought only despair. The sunset announced the end of another day, the first of many she would spend imprisoned in that forsaken place, away from any trace of freedom. Her stomach growled in protest, but hunger was already becoming confused with the growing anguish within her. Her small body trembled, not just from the cold seeping through the cracks in the walls, but from the suffocating fear of uncertainty. Outside, the world carried on its course, oblivious to her suffering as if her pain didn't matter. With her eyes fixed on the last light of day, she forced herself to swallow a sob, trying to control the revolt that was beginning to grow inside her. She needed to be strong. She needed to resist. And above all, she needed to find a way out of there. The days in the attic dragged on like a dark eternity, each moment marked by the torment of hunger and the cold that penetrated through the cracks in the old walls. Valerie, now thinner and paler, had lost track of time in her forced captivity. The meals, when they came, were scarce and irregular. A piece of stale bread here, a cold soup there, served carelessly by the new governess, who avoided even looking into her eyes. The girl's stomach growled constantly, a painful reminder of her desperate situation. During the coldest nights, she would curl up in a thin, tattered blanket, shivering as she tried to warm herself, dreaming of the days when her father would embrace her, protecting her from all harm. Loneliness was perhaps the worst part of her torment. The dusty walls of the attic were her only companions, silent witnesses to her tears and desperate whispers. Occasionally she would hear voices coming from downstairs, laughter, conversations, normal life happening while she withered in her private prison. During those hours, Valerie would press her ear against the wooden floor, desperate for any connection to the outside world, for any sign of hope she could find in the distant voices she could barely distinguish through the old boards. In her office downstairs, Catherine conducted her meetings with a calculated efficiency that would have impressed even the shrewdest businessman. Amidst glasses of expensive wine and artificial smiles, she negotiated Valerie's future as if she were selling an unwanted commodity. "The adoption process needs to be discreet and fast," she instructed a shady-looking lawyer. "I want impeccable documents. A family abroad, preferably in a country where no one can trace the girl. Price is not an issue, as long as she disappears definitively from my life." Catherine's plan unfolded like a complex web of lies and manipulations. Each forged document, each bribed witness, each bribed authority was another thread in her intricate plot. The story she had created was perfect. A troubled child, traumatized by her father's death, who needed a fresh start with a loving family abroad. Who would dare question the motives of an apparently devoted stepmother who only wanted the best for her orphaned stepdaughter? On a particularly silent night, when the mansion seemed to sleep under a blanket of absolute darkness, Valerie was awakened by the familiar sound of Catherine's heels echoing down the hallway from the attic. Her stepmother's voice, normally controlled and melodious, had an undertone of barely contained triumph as she spoke on the phone. "Finally, it's all settled. Alexander's will is now in my name. Nobody will ever know what I did. The fortune is all mine now, and soon I'll get rid of the last obstacle. The brat will disappear without a trace, as if she had never existed." The words penetrated Valerie's heart like ice daggers, sharp and lethal, cutting through every shred of hope that still remained within her. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath hitched by silent sobs, as the weight of that terrible revelation sank upon her frail shoulders. Huddled in her usual corner, hugging her knees against her chest, she tried to contain the tremors that shook her, but her body seemed to have a will of its own. The cold of the attic pierced her thin skin, intensifying the feeling of abandonment that took root inside her. Her gaze wandered across the dark and dusty environment, resting on the stacked boxes, the antique furniture covered by yellowed sheets, the shadows dancing on the walls as the faint light from outside faded. It was a scene that once merely represented isolation, but now symbolized something much worse: the total erasure of her existence. She finally understood the extent of Catherine's diabolical plan. It wasn't just about keeping her imprisoned or keeping her away. It was about completely eradicating her. Valerie wasn't seen as a child, a human being with dreams and feelings. To Catherine, she was merely an inconvenient stain, something that needed to be erased from the perfect tapestry she had woven for her new life. Her stomach churned with anguish, a tight knot of despair and fear. How could someone be so cruel? How could someone who should represent protection and care desire her obliteration with such coldness? The certainty that no one would come to save her etched itself into her soul, and a new emotion arose, burning amidst the terror: defiance. She wouldn't be erased, not without a fight. That same night, unable to sleep after overhearing Catherine's disturbing conversation, Valerie roamed the attic like a restless little ghost. Her delicate fingers slid along the ancient walls, feeling every imperfection, every crack that time had left as scars on the weathered wood. The silvery moonlight, seeping through the small dusty window, cast dancing shadows that seemed to tell silent stories of other times, of other secrets kept in that forgotten space. It was during this nocturnal exploration that her fingers found something different: a subtle irregularity in the peeling wallpaper, a protrusion that shouldn't be there. With a racing heart and trembling hands, she began to investigate that area more closely. The wallpaper, already yellowed and deteriorated by time, began to peel away easily under her eager fingers, gradually revealing a small cavity that had been carefully concealed. Inside this makeshift hiding place, her fingers touched something solid, a metal box no larger than a book, covered by a thin layer of dust attesting to its long period of abandonment. The object, though small, seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 secrets within. Carefully, so as not to make a sound, Valerie retrieved the box from its hiding place, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it could be heard through the floorboards. The moonlight illuminated the metallic surface, revealing marks of oxidation and a small latch that miraculously wasn't locked. Her hands were shaking even more now, not just from the cold that intensified during the early morning hours, but from the anticipation of what she might find inside that mysterious container. When she finally mustered the courage to open the box, the soft creak of the rusted hinge sounded like a thunderclap to her ears, sensitized by the silence. The first thing her eyes caught, illuminated by a beam of moonlight that seemed to have chosen that exact moment to grow more intense, was an object that made her heart stop for an instant. An old recorder, the kind her father used to use to record his ideas when he was starting his businesses. Next to it, A single cassette tape with a handwritten label that instantly froze her hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was her father's. With trembling hands, Valerie held the old recorder as if it were a sacred relic. The silvery moonlight seeping through the attic window illuminated the object, revealing every scratch, every mark of time on its metallic surface. Her fingers traced the contours of the device delicately, recognizing every button, every detail of that model her father used to have in his office. The characteristic smell of old metal and magnetic tape brought a wave of memories, recollections of entire afternoons, watching Alexander record his ideas, his plans, his hopes for the future that had now been brutally interrupted. The tape inside the recorder was positioned at the beginning, as if it had been waiting all these months to be discovered. Valerie took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in her hands as her finger hovered over the play button. The silence of the attic was so absolute that she could hear the rapid beating of her own heart. With a decisive motion, she pressed the button, and the characteristic mechanical sound of the device breaking the night's quietude made her heart leap. For a moment, there was only the soft noise of the tape spinning, and then, like a ghost materialized in sound, her father's voice filled the space. "A recording number 1, October 15th, Alexander began, his voice carrying a tension Valerie had never perceived before. "If someone is listening to this recording, especially you, my daughter, it means my suspicions were correct. Something very wrong is happening in our home, and I fear I don't have enough time to stop it." A heavy pause followed those words, during which Valerie could hear her father's uneven breathing. The next words that came out of the recorder made Valerie's blood run cold. "Catherine is not who she appears to be. In recent months, I have noticed subtle changes in my health whenever she insists on serving me personally. At first, I thought it was just stress, fatigue, but the symptoms are too specific, too consistent. After discovering suspicious documents in her drawer and hearing her making strange calls late at night, I finally put the pieces together. She is slowly poisoning me." Alexander's voice trembled slightly at this point, revealing the weight of the terrible discovery. The account continued, each word confirming Valerie's worst fears and revealing a plot even more sinister than she had imagined. "I found research on undetectable poisons on her computer, suspicious bank transfers, and most alarmingly, a draft document altering my will. I tried to gather concrete evidence, but she is meticulous, leaving no traces." A dry cough interrupted his speech, followed by a moment of anguished silence. "Valerie, my dear, if you are listening to this, you need to be strong. I know you are just a child, but you have always been smarter and braver than anyone imagines." Silent tears rolled down Valerie's face as the recording played on. "I've left copies of important documents hidden in various places. There's a secret safe behind the painting in the office. The combination is your birthday. But most importantly, don't trust Catherine. She's dangerous more than she might seem. If anything happens to me, seek out Inspector Martinez from the Federal Police. He's the only one I can." Alexander's voice was abruptly cut off by the sound of doors opening, followed by footsteps. "She's coming," he whispered hurriedly. "I need to hide this." "Valerie, The sound cut off suddenly, leaving the unfinished sentence of love hanging in the air like a last breath. In the silence that followed the end of the recording, Valerie remained motionless, her small body seeming even more fragile under the unbearable weight of that discovery. Her trembling fingers clung tightly to the recorder, her knuckles whitened by the desperate grip, as if that object were the only anchor preventing her from collapsing completely. Tears streamed freely down her dirty face, tracing warm, salty paths on her cold skin. The air inside the attic seemed to have grown denser, too heavy for her childish lungs. She felt a lump forming in her throat, choking any sound that might try to escape. It all made sense now. Catherine's cold, calculating looks, her ever too sweet words, the way she manipulated every situation to her advantage. The truth, so brutal and clear now, weighed on her small shoulders like a tombstone. Her father hadn't left by chance. He had been torn from her life, slowly and methodically, by the woman who now controlled every aspect of her fate. Valerie bit her lip hard, as if physical pain could alleviate the growing agony within her. Her eyes scanned the dark, stuffy attic, now not just a prison but a tomb where Catherine expected to bury her alive. The woman who kept her locked up there was the same one who smiled falsely at others, who pretended to be a grieving widow, who played the victim while meticulously destroying everything around her with a calculated precision worthy of the worst nightmares. Her heart pounded, not just with fear, but with something new, something growing silently within her. It was anger, no longer the helpless despair of a frightened child, but a fire that was beginning to burn in her soul. She wouldn't let Catherine win. She needed to act. She needed to get out of there, and more than anything, she needed to bring justice. The discovery of the recording had transformed Valerie. The fear and sadness that had dominated her gaze in recent months gave way to a fierce determination, carefully concealed. The recorder, now her most precious possession, remained hidden in a small space she had created under a loose floorboard in the attic. During the long hours of solitude, her young but perceptive mind worked tirelessly, devising escape plans, imagining ways to bring the truth to the outside world. The proof her father had left was like a flickering flame of hope burning in her chest, giving her strength to endure every moment of her captivity. During the rare visits Catherine made to the attic, usually to bring food or check if her prisoner remained submissive, Valerie had subtly changed her demeanor. Instead of cowering in fear or crying as she used to, she now maintained a studied, almost artificial calm. Her eyes, once always downcast and teary, occasionally rose to observe her captor's every move, memorizing details that had once gone unnoticed: the bunch of keys she carried, the path she took to the door, the times of her visits. Every piece of information was a clue to her future liberation. However, the change in the girl's behavior did not go unnoticed by Catherine. The woman, accustomed to controlling every aspect of her elaborate plot, began to notice small signs that set off alarms in her calculating mind. During one of her visits, as she left a plate of food on the attic floor, her perceptive eyes caught something different in Valerie's gaze, a glimmer of defiance, quickly masked, but undeniably present. "You're strangely quiet today," Catherine commented, her honeyed voice barely concealing the suspicion that was beginning to grow. "Have you finally accepted your situation, or are you plotting something?" The tension between the two grew with each encounter, like a rope being stretched to its limit. Valerie knew she needed to act soon. Every day that passed was a day closer to her terrible fate on the outside, where Catherine planned to send her. But the recording in her possession was like a loaded weapon. It needed to be used at the precise moment, with surgical accuracy. One false move, and her only chance for justice would be lost forever. At night, she pressed her ear against the attic floor, trying to catch any useful information from Catherine's phone conversations, any detail she could use to her advantage. Catherine's suspicion, however, began to manifest in increasingly aggressive attitudes. The already scarce meals became even more irregular. Visits to the attic started happening at random times, as if she were trying to catch Valerie in some suspicious act. On one of these occasions, Catherine scoured the small space with eagle eyes, rummaging through the makeshift bed and checking every visible corner. "For you know, dear," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "children who keep secrets tend to get into very serious trouble. It would be a shame if your fate had to be accelerated." The veiled threat loomed in the air like a toxic cloud, dense and suffocating, making Valerie's heart race at an uneven rhythm. It was as if the environment itself had absorbed Catherine's malice, impregnating every corner of the attic with an invisible but palpable tension. The cold rose from the worn wooden floor, seeping into her thin skin, but the shiver running down her spine didn't come from the temperature. It came from fear. She knew her time was running out. Catherine, like an experienced predator, was sniffing the change in the air, sensing that her prey held some hidden trump card. Every sharp look the stepmother cast in her direction, every meticulously controlled gesture, were little warning signs that made her mind spin in search of an escape. Valerie needed to find a way out of that attic, to get the recording to someone who could help her, and she needed to do it before Catherine decided to take more drastic measures. Thoughts seethed in her mind, like gears grinding under pressure. How to leave without being seen, how to outsmart someone so shrewd. The idea of failing was unacceptable, for the price of error was too high. Her hands clutched the small recorder against her chest, feeling the symbolic weight of that object. Claire carried the truth. It was her only weapon against the woman who was trying to erase her existence. Her father's words echoed in her mind like a mantra, bringing her the spark of courage she needed. "You've always been smarter and braver than anyone imagines." Now, more than ever, she would need to prove him right. And for that, she needed to act. The twilight cast elongated shadows across the mansion's windows, turning the hallway into a tunnel of gloom and mystery. On the lower floor, the sound of Catherine's heels echoed against the marble floor, each calculated and resolute step reverberating off the walls like a harbinger of imminent danger. Her elegant figure moved with the predatory grace of a panther, while her fingers idly caressed an ancient key she had just taken from a secret drawer in her office. The dying afternoon light reflected off the metal, creating small golden glimmers that danced on the walls like malignant sparks. On her face, once always marked by a studiously sweet smile, now drew an expression she had never allowed others to see, a mask of pure cruelty that distorted her delicate features into something almost unrecognizable. Her eyes, normally calculating but controlled, now burned with a cold fury that seemed capable of freezing the very air around her. Between her well-groomed fingers, the key seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, as if aware of the crucial role it was about to play in the unfolding events. As she climbed the stairs towards the attic, Catherine muttered inaudible words to herself, her face occasionally contorting into expressions of pure hatred. The discovery she had made moments earlier in her office, traces of dust on documents that should have been untouched, subtle fingerprint marks in places no one should have reached, had been enough to confirm her suspicions. That little prisoner in the attic held some secret, some evidence that could destroy everything she had so meticulously built. And now, with that specific key in her hands, she was determined to find out exactly what it was. The sound of her steps diminished to a sepulchral silence as she reached the hallway leading to the attic. The darkness was now almost complete, broken only by occasional shafts of light seeping through the closed blinds, creating ominous patterns on the faded wallpaper. Catherine paused for a moment, her silhouette etched against the gloom like a malign apparition, as a disturbing smile formed on her perfectly painted lips. With a deliberately slow motion, she raised the key to eye level, examining it one last time before taking the next step towards her inevitable destiny. The attic door opened with a menacing creak, revealing Catherine in all her restrained fury. Her eyes scanned the environment like searchlights in the darkness, until they settled on the loose piece of wallpaper that betrayed the discovered hiding place. With deliberately slow steps, she approached the wall, her long, elegant fingers tearing away the remaining aged paper, revealing the empty cavity behind. Her expression turned into a mask of hatred upon finding the hidden metal box, and the sound of the latch opening echoed through the attic like a death sentence. The recorder inside the box made Catherine's blood run cold. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed play, and Alexander's voice filled the space, revealing all her suspicions, all her meticulously planned crimes. The fury on her face grew with every word of the recording, transforming her delicate features into something monstrous. With a scream of rage, she hurled the recorder against the wall, but the damage was done. The tape had revealed her true nature. It was then that she noticed Valerie was not in her usual place. The girl, anticipating Catherine's discovery, had hidden behind a pile of antique furniture, and the moment the stepmother was distracted by her outburst of anger, she seized the opportunity. With the agility that only a desperate child could have, Valerie slipped through the attic door and began descending the stairs, her bare feet barely touching the steps as she ran for her life. Catherine's scream when she realized the escape echoed through the mansion like the roar of an enraged beast. Her heels pounded violently against the steps as she pursued the girl, knocking over any object in her path. Valerie managed to reach the ground floor and ran towards the garden, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. The night was dark, but the full moon provided enough light for her to see where she was running. The garden, once a refuge filled with happy memories by his father's side, now transformed into a suffocating labyrinth. The trees, which once offered welcoming shade, now seemed like dark walls closing in around her. The sweet scent of flowers mingled with the damp aroma of freshly watered earth, but Valerie had no time to notice details. Her heart pounded in her chest, her lungs burned with the effort, and her bare feet sank into the soft grass with each hurried step. She ran between the rose bushes that Anthony, the old gardener, tended with such care. The thorny branches clung to the thin fabric of her dress, leaving small scratches on her legs. But the pain was irrelevant. Her only concern was to find a way to the street, a point of escape before it was too late. The cold night wind beat against her face, mingling with the silent tears streaming down her skin. Each thud of her feet against the ground sounded too loud, as if the garden itself was denouncing her presence. Her anxious gaze searched for an exit, but before she could react, a shadow moved ahead, emerging from the darkness like a lurking predator. Catherine. The woman appeared suddenly in front of her, blocking her escape route with calculated precision. Her black dress billowed in the wind, and her eyes shone with a dangerous fury. Her smile was cruel, her lips curved in a satisfied sneer. "You little meddler!" she hissed, her voice laced with venom. Her tone left no doubts. There was no more room for deceptions, only for her true face. She advanced with her hands outstretched like claws, her fingers rigid and ready to seize her. "Did you really think you could defeat me?" Valerie felt the chill of terror take over her body, but she couldn't give up now. She would need to be faster, smarter, braver. Back inside the mansion, Catherine dragged Valerie to the study that once belonged to Alexander. The dim light from the lamp cast distorted shadows on the walls, transforming the once cozy environment into a nightmarish scene. With a rough motion, she forced the girl to sit in one of the leather armchairs, her long and threatening fingers still digging into the child's delicate arm. "Where's the tape, you little pest?" she hissed, her face contorted into a mask of controlled fury. "If you hand it over now, I promise your disappearance will be quick and painless." Valerie, despite the fear that made her heart almost leap from her chest, kept her eyes fixed on her stepmother's. In her mind, she replayed her father's words from the recording, seeking strength in his memory. With a courage that surprised even herself, she replied, "The tape is hidden where you'll never find it, and if anything happens to me, several people will receive it." It was a lie, of course. The original tape was still in the attic, dropped somewhere after Catherine had thrown it. But the doubt that crossed her stepmother's gaze was enough to create a distraction. Seizing the moment of Catherine's hesitation, Valerie used a technique her father had taught her in her self-defense classes, something he had insisted she learn just in case. With a swift motion, she stomped hard on Catherine's foot, momentarily throwing the woman off balance in her high heels. The stepmother's scream of pain and surprise echoed through the mansion as Valerie broke free from her grip and ran towards the front door. The cold night air hit her face like a slap when she finally reached the street, her lungs burning from the desperate run. "Help!" she screamed with all the strength she could muster, her voice echoing through the empty streets of the upscale neighborhood. "She killed my father. Help!" Lights began turning on in the neighboring houses, and the sound of approaching sirens cut through the stillness of the night. For a brief moment, Valerie felt a wave of relief. Someone would finally listen to her. But her hope was brutally crushed when the first patrol car stopped in front of the mansion. Catherine, who had followed Valerie to the street, had already assumed her mask of motherly concern. With false tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, she addressed the police officers. "Thank God you arrived, my stepdaughter. She hasn't been well since her father's death. The doctors say it's a case of psychotic delusions. I was on the phone with the clinic when she ran away. Her performance was flawless, every word carefully chosen to paint Valerie as a disturbed child. The police officers, with their crisp uniforms and rigid postures, were Valerie's last hope. But as soon as their gazes met Catherine's, she felt a chilling shiver run down her spine. The silent complicity between them was subtle but undeniable. Small gestures, an almost imperceptible nod, a raising of eyebrows in agreement betrayed that this was not a rescue, but a capture. They approached slowly, their expressions carefully sculpted into a mask of false concern. Valerie felt her stomach churn. The uniform, the badge, the firm voices, everything should represent safety. But at that moment, it only brought her a paralyzing terror. "Come on, dear," said one of them, crouching slightly to her level. His voice was forcedly sweet, like an adult trying to soothe a child who doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. "Your stepmother is very worried about you. Let's go back home and sort this out." Valerie instinctively recoiled, her small feet sinking slightly into the packed dirt. Her heart raced and her hands clutched the recorder to her chest as if that object were her only salvation. "No, you don't understand." Her voice came out choked, a mixture of fear and urgency. "She poisoned my father. I have proof. She wants to send me away so no one ever knows the truth." The officers exchanged another quick glance before one of them released a theatrical sigh, as if he were dealing with a frightened and deluded little girl. "We understand, dear, but this isn't something to be resolved like this. You need to rest, talk to your family." Each word was laden with false patience, a feigned understanding that burned Valerie's skin like fire. Her eyes shone with tears of anger and despair. Catherine had planned everything. It wasn't enough to steal her family, her home, her childhood. She had even bought the police. With the dirty money she had taken from Alexander, Valerie had no allies. She was alone. And if she didn't do something, she would soon lose any chance of justice. The mansion's door closed with a dull thud behind the departing officers, leaving Valerie alone with her stepmother in the entrance hall. The ensuing silence was thick, suffocating, broken only by the sound of Catherine's heels echoing on the marble floor as she slowly circled the girl, like a predator assessing her prey. Her face, previously marked by the mask of maternal concern she had displayed for the police, now revealed an expression of cruel triumph that twisted her features into something almost demonic in the dim chandelier light. With calculated gestures, Catherine retrieved her cell phone from her purse, her fingers gliding swiftly across the screen as a disturbing smile formed on her perfectly painted lips. "You know, dear," she began, her voice dripping with venom, "I had really intended to wait a few more weeks, give a more natural air to your departure. But after your little performance for the neighborhood, I'm afraid I'll have to move our plans forward." Her eyes met Valerie's, and the glint of pure malice emanating from them made the girl shudder involuntarily. While speaking on the phone in a low and conspiratorial tone, Catherine didn't take her eyes off her stepdaughter, who remained paralyzed in the middle of the hall. "Yes, I need it to be today. No, I can't wait until tomorrow. The merchandise is unstable, you understand. It needs to be transported immediately." A pause followed by a grim smile. "The price? It doesn't matter. Just make sure she disappears for good." Hanging up the phone, she turned to Valerie with an expression that mixed satisfaction and cruelty. "In a few hours, dear, you'll be just another missing child, a sad statistic. And this time, not even your dear father will be able to leave clues to save you." With a quick and brutal movement, Catherine grabbed Valerie's arm, her fingers gripping tightly enough to leave marks on the girl's delicate skin. Without hesitation, she began dragging her down the hallways towards a hidden door that Valerie had never noticed before. The air around seemed to grow heavier, and a chill ran up her spine as she realized she was being led to an unknown place inside her own home. "Consider it a promotion, dear," Catherine whispered, her voice laden with cruel sarcasm. "From the attic to the basement. Down there it's much more definitive." Valerie tried to break free, but the grip was relentless. The creak of the old door opened to a narrow and dark flight of stairs, a smell of damp and mold escaping from the depths. The sound of Catherine's heels striking against the steps echoed like a sinister omen, each step bringing Valerie closer to an unknown and terrifying fate. An hour before the departure, Valerie pleaded to the governess, "Please, I need to pee before traveling." The woman, annoyed by the request but fearing an accident in the car, agreed to take her back to the mansion. "Be quick," she ordered dryly, leading her inside. But instead of going to the ground floor bathroom, Valerie ran upstairs. "The bathroom downstairs is clogged," she shouted, knowing the governess, out of laziness, wouldn't go up and check. With her heart pounding, she sneaked to the attic door. Her hands were shaking as she searched among the debris of the box Catalina had thrown against the wall. There, partially hidden under an antique piece of furniture, was the tape, miraculously intact. With nimble fingers, Valerie tucked it inside an old envelope that was nearby and placed it in her sock, adjusting her pants to hide the bulge. "I'm coming," she announced, descending the stairs as if nothing had happened. The governess merely grunted in response, rushing her to the car. Minutes later, as the vehicle left the mansion, Valerie could feel the weight of the tape against her leg. The only proof that could expose her stepmother's crimes was safe with her. Minutes later, the black car glided silently down the highway, its tinted windows hiding the drama unfolding inside. Valerie was seated in the back seat, closely watched by the governess Catherine had appointed as her guardian during the trip. The supposed destination was a boarding school, but the girl knew this journey would end in a much more sinister way. Her heart raced as she tried to control the panic that threatened to consume her. Her eyes fixed on the landscape passing quickly by the window, desperately searching for any sign of hope. That's when something caught her attention. A huge illuminated billboard by the side of the road. Lauren Spencer's smiling face, the country's most famous TV host, seemed to look directly at her, advertising her live show that aired every afternoon. Valerie's eyes widened as she noticed the studio's address, stamped in bright letters in the corner of the ad. A spark of hope ignited in her chest as her agile mind began to formulate a plan. Lauren Spencer was known for championing impossible causes, for giving a voice to those who had none, and more importantly, her show was broadcast live to millions of viewers. The idea struck like lightning in her mind. If she could make it to that studio, if she could tell her story in front of the cameras, not all of Catherine's money would be able to silence her. With this realization, Valerie began to execute her plan. Slowly, she started to squirm in her seat, letting small groans escape her lips. The governess, who until then had kept her eyes fixed on her phone, shot her a suspicious look. "What is it now, girl?" she asked with barely concealed irritation. "I'm not feeling well," Valerie mumbled, her voice trembling and weak as she pressed a hand against her stomach. "I think I'm going to throw up." She leaned forward, letting her breathing become more erratic. The governess instinctively backed away, the fear of being hit by a possible stream of vomit overriding her obligation to watch the prisoner. "Driver," she called urgently. "We need to stop somewhere. The girl is getting sick." The gas station appeared like a blessing a few kilometers ahead, its fluorescent lights cutting through the dusk of the early evening. The driver pulled up close to the restrooms, and the governess, still keeping a safe distance, led Valerie to the facility's door. 5 minutes, she warned, her index finger pointed at the girl's face. And don't try any tricks. They'll be right out here. Valerie merely nodded, one hand still pressed against her stomach as she stumbled inside the bathroom. Once inside the gas station's bathroom, Valerie allowed a small smile of determination to cross her face. Her breathing was still accelerated, and her heart was beating so hard that it seemed to echo in the small tiled space. The smell of disinfectant mingled with the faint scent of gasoline wafting in from outside, but she didn't care. For a moment she leaned against the door, trying to catch her breath while her mind worked in a frantic whirlwind. Her eyes scanned the cramped, cold environment. The mirror above the sink was stained, and the fluorescent light flickered every now and then, casting irregular shadows on the walls. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of engines and the muffled voices from outside. Valerie approached the small tilting window, standing on tiptoe for a better view. The glass was a little fogged, but the sight of the gas station's yard unfolded clearly before her. Trucks came and went, some refueling, others parked at strategic points as drivers moved around the site. Her gaze danced quickly between the vehicles, searching for something, anything, that could be her opportunity for escape. It was then that her heart raced. A large and imposing delivery truck was parked near the convenience store, but it was no ordinary truck. On the side container, the logo of a television station gleamed under the light of the street lamps. Destiny was finally at her side. Valerie felt a lump in her throat. She knew this could be her only chance to bring the truth to the world, but she couldn't make a mistake. The slightest slip, and Catherine would find her before she could escape. Now all she needed was courage, and the ability to execute the next step of her desperate plan without making a sound. As she left the bathroom, Valerie maintained her act of illness, staggering slightly as she approached the car. The nanny, still keeping her distance for fear of possible vomiting, negligently held the vehicle keys in her right hand. With a precision that would surprise even her father, Valerie executed her plan. She purposefully tripped, falling against the nanny who, in an instinctive reflex, tried to catch her, dropping the keys. In a quick motion, the girl grabbed the key ring from the ground and, before the woman could react, pushed her towards the back seat of the car. The sound of the doors automatically locking echoed like music to Valerie's ears as the nanny processed, dumbfounded, what had just happened. With one last look of triumph, the girl threw the keys with all her might over the gas station wall towards an empty lot covered in tall grass. The nanny's reaction was instant. Her face went from shock to fury in a matter of seconds, and she began pounding on the armored windows of the car, her screams muffled by the thick glass. "Help! Someone help me! The girl is running away!" Without wasting another second, Valerie dashed towards the truck yard, her heart beating so hard it seemed like it wanted to leap out of her chest. Her small feet barely touched the ground as she ran, guided by adrenaline and desperation. The nanny's screams were starting to attract attention, and she could hear male voices and heavy footsteps approaching. The TV station's truck was there, like a promise of salvation, its rear doors ajar as the workers loaded equipment. Taking advantage of a moment of distraction from the workers, Valerie slipped into the back of the truck, hiding behind some equipment boxes. Her small body compressed into the tight space as she tried to control her panting breath. The commotion outside was increasing. She could hear the nanny's raised voice and the driver explaining the situation to the gas station attendants, the sound of people searching, calling her name. But she remained motionless, silently praying that no one would think to check the truck. After what seemed an eternity, but can't have been more than a few minutes, Valerie heard the rear doors of the truck being closed and the engine starting. The voices of the workers conversing in the cabin reached her muffled, "We need to get back to the studio soon. Lauren's show starts in 2 hours, and we still have to set up all the equipment." The relief that flooded her chest upon hearing those words almost made her cry. As the truck left the gas station, taking her towards her only chance of salvation, Valerie allowed herself a small smile of hope. For the first time since her father's death, destiny seemed to be on her side. The journey in the truck bed was uncomfortable and frightening. The cold metal under her body vibrated with every pothole in the road, making her joints ache from the impact. The smell of fuel mixed with the dry, dusty air invading the cramped space, leaving her throat raw and her breathing irregular. Valerie huddled against one of the corners, pressing her hands against the side of the truck bed to try to keep herself steady. Each turn was a new test of endurance, threatening to reveal her presence if she didn't hold on tight. Each sudden break made her heart leap against her ribs, her mind anticipating the worst possible scenario. The driver noticing her presence, someone alerting Catherine, being captured before even having a chance to fight. But Valerie held firm. She clung to her determination, as if it were an invisible shield, a barrier against the fear that tried to suffocate her. The cold wind cut through her skin through the cracks in the truck bed, but she barely felt it. Her thoughts were focused on one thing, the truth. In her mind, she repeated like a mantra the words she would say in front of the cameras, words of denunciation, courage, liberation, the truth that would finally be revealed to the world. Her father's recording may have been left behind, but she still had her voice. She had her story, and more important than any physical evidence, she had the courage he had always said she possessed. Her body might be weak, her eyes heavy with fatigue, but her soul was on fire. Nothing would make her give up now. The truck finally stopped, and Valerie heard the workers' voices moving away from the cabin. Her heart was beating so hard, she feared it could be heard through the equipment boxes that hid her. When the silence settled, she dared to move, carefully sneaking out of her hiding place. The rear door of the truck bed was ajar, allowing her to catch a glimpse of the frantic movement in the television studio parking lot. Workers rushed back and forth carrying equipment, while large illuminated panels announced that Lauren Spencer's show was on the air. With the agility of a cat, Valerie slid out of the truck, blending into the shadows cast by the parked vehicles. The broadcasting building loomed imposingly before her, its glass walls reflecting the lights of the city that was beginning to awaken for the night. Through the ground floor windows, she could see monitors broadcasting the live program. Lauren Spencer was interviewing someone on her famous red couch, while the audience reacted with enthusiastic applause. Adrenaline coursed through her veins as she observed the bustle, looking for a way to enter the building unnoticed. A group of production assistants rushed past her, carrying water bottles and papers, so distracted by their tasks that they didn't even notice the small figure hidden behind a column. Valerie followed them discreetly, her heart nearly stopping when they used an access card to open a side door. It was her chance. With a quick movement, she slipped inside just before the door closed. The corridor she found herself in was filled with people too busy with their tasks to notice a lost child, and illuminated signs indicated the direction of the main studio. The words she heard as she passed by one of the open doors made her blood run cold. "The police just called. Apparently there's a runaway girl in the area, possibly dangerous. We need to reinforce security." Valerie felt a chill run down her spine. The serious tone of the guards made it clear they were taking the situation seriously. Catherine had already activated her contacts. Time was running out. If she didn't act quickly, her last chance would slip through her fingers. She took a deep breath and proceeded along the sides of the hallway, keeping close to the walls to avoid being seen. The carpeted floor muffled the sound of her steps, but her heart was pounding too loudly in her ears, as if it could betray her at any moment. She passed closed doors, cables scattered on the floor, monitors displaying the live broadcast. Every second lost was an even greater risk. Then, finally, she spotted what she was looking for. At the end of the corridor, a large double door gleamed under the cold studio lights, the red sign glowing brightly. Studio 1, Live. Valerie swallowed hard. Through the glass, she could see Lauren Spencer with her back to her, the cameras positioned around, the blinding lights illuminating the stage, the attentive audience, absorbing every word of the broadcast. Her only chance to reveal the truth to the world was just a few meters away, but getting there without being intercepted would require more courage than ever. With her heart beating so hard it seemed like it wanted to leap out of her chest, Valerie pushed open the heavy studio doors. The intense glare of the spotlights temporarily blinded her, but she didn't hesitate. Her small, determined steps echoed through the studio as she ran toward the stage, passing stunned guards who didn't expect a child to be able to breach the facility's security. The audience immediately reacted with exclamations of surprise, and the cameras, by the operator's professional instinct, turned toward the little intruder who was now center stage. Lauren Spencer, known for her composure, interrupted her interview mid-sentence, turning toward the panting girl who had appeared out of nowhere. The host, with her years of experience in unexpected situations, remained calm as she approached Valerie. "It's okay, dear. Everything's all right," she said, her voice conveying a serenity that contrasted with the chaos that had broken out in the studio. Producers were shouting backstage, guards were cautiously approaching, but the cameras kept rolling. After all, it was a live show. Tears began to stream down Valerie's face as she finally let out the words she had kept inside for so long. "Please, you have to help me." My stepmother took my father's life and stole everything he had. Her voice, though trembling, carried a conviction that plunged the entire studio into a deathly silence. The audience, which seconds before had been murmuring in confusion, now collectively held its breath. Lauren Spencer, sensing the gravity of the situation, gently led Valerie to the show's famous red couch. "Calm down, let's talk calmly," said Paula, holding the girl's trembling hands. "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." But Valeria couldn't calm down, not when she finally had a chance to expose the truth. With shaking fingers, she reached into her sock, retrieving the tape she had been carrying. "I have proof. My father recorded everything before he died. She poisoned him, forged documents, stole our fortune, and now she wants to send me away so no one will discover the truth." The words poured out in a desperate torrent as she extended an envelope with the tape toward the host. The show's production, realizing the magnitude of the moment, quickly provided equipment capable of playing the tape. Lauren Spencer, maintaining her professional demeanor even in the face of such shocking revelations, tried to calm both the audience and the producers, shouting in her earpiece. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, turning to the cameras, "we are facing an extraordinary situation. This brave young woman has come to us with very serious accusations, and apparently with proof to substantiate them. We will give her the chance to be heard." The minutes that followed were filled with palpable tension in the studio. The air seemed heavy, charged with a silent electricity that held everyone there captive to that moment, as if they were witnessing an inevitable conclusion. The subtle hum of microphones being adjusted and the click of cameras positioning themselves captured every detail of Valerie's face, her red, swollen eyes, her small hands clutching the fabric of her own dress, her breathing punctuated by sobs she tried to contain. As the technicians prepared the equipment to play the recording, Valerie trembled on the couch, her frail body shaken by a mix of emotions that tore her apart from within. Fear and courage battled inside her, causing her to alternate between moments of convulsive crying and a steely determination, as if her own spirit refused to succumb to weakness. The audience watched in absolute silence, an almost sacred respect that made the atmosphere even more intense. Many had tears in their eyes as they saw the suffering etched on that child's face, so small and yet so incredibly strong. People held each other's hands, ordinary spectators who until minutes ago had no idea of the cruel story that was about to be revealed. Lauren Spencer, the renowned host, kept a protective arm around Valerie's shoulders, an instinctive gesture of support, like a mother who wished to shield her from all harm. The host whispered soft words, promises that everything would be all right, that now she was no longer alone. At that moment, Lauren was not just a famous television face. She was a determined woman, helping a desperate child, a child who had risked everything to seek justice. The broadcast executives, hastily summoned to the studio, exchanged worried glances while discussing in tense whispers how to handle that unexpected situation. One of them, a man in a grey suit and a condescending expression, approached Lauren Spencer. "We need to interrupt the program. This is obviously a misunderstanding, a fanciful story from a traumatized child." Lauren, however, remained steadfast in her decision to listen to Valerie, especially after noticing the conviction in the girl's eyes as she firmly held the tape in her trembling hands. The sound technician, after a few minutes of adjustments, finally managed to connect a suitable device to play the recording. The entire studio plunged into a dense silence when Lauren Spencer, with a solemn gesture, inserted the tape into the equipment. The initial static sound made Valerie's heart leap. It was the first time other people would hear her father's voice, revealing the truth about his death. When the play button was pressed, Alexander's tense, grave voice filled the environment, making the audience collectively hold their breath. Record number 1, October 15th, the recording began, Alexander's voice carrying an urgency that made everyone's hair stand on end. "If someone is listening to this recording, especially you, my daughter, it means my suspicions were correct." As the recording proceeded, revealing the dark details of Catherine's plan, expressions of shock and horror began to form on the audience's faces. Alexander's voice, describing how he was being slowly poisoned, how he had discovered forged documents, how he feared for his daughter's safety, echoed through the studio like a posthumous testament of a victim who had foreseen his own demise. Lauren Spencer, an experienced professional who had conducted countless impactful interviews, could not hide her own emotion. Her hands protectively gripped Valerie's shoulders as the revelations continued. The network executives, who moments earlier had wanted to interrupt the broadcast, now watched paralyzed, aware that they were witnessing one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of live television. Millions of viewers across the country, glued to their screens, listened in stunned silence to each word of the posthumous confession. The recording reached its most impactful moment when Alexander, his voice choked with emotion and possibly the effects of the poison, made his final plea. "Valerie, my dear, if you're listening to this, you need to be strong. I know you're just a child, but you've always been smarter and braver than anyone could imagine." The abrupt sound of doors opening and footsteps approaching ended the recording, leaving the tension of those last moments of lucidity from a man who knew he was nearing his end. The silence that followed in the studio was deafening, broken only by the stifled sobs of some audience members and Valerie's soft crying. Lauren Spencer, still visibly shaken, took a deep breath and regained her professional composure. Even with teary eyes, her demeanor radiated seriousness and commitment. She turned towards the cameras, her steady gaze reflecting the gravity of what had just been revealed. The silence in the studio was almost absolute, broken only by the soft murmur of people in the audience who were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. The host gripped the microphone tighter, the emotion evident in her trembling but resolute voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed something extraordinary." Her voice echoed through the studio, charged with an intensity that sent chills down everyone's spine. "This is not merely the story of a child with a fertile imagination. We have just heard the confession of a man who knew he was being victimized by something terrible, who documented his final moments in the hope of protecting his daughter and ensuring justice would be served." The audience remained silent for a brief second before an indignant murmur took over the environment. People discreetly wiped away tears, while others shook their heads in shock, barely believing the level of cruelty behind that plot. But outside the studio, the repercussions were already spreading like wildfire. Social media exploded with the broadcast. Hashtags emerged and multiplied by the second. Outraged comments flooded the screens of millions of devices across the country. Justice for Valerie was already becoming a digital movement, while independent journalists began pulling investigations on the woman behind it all. At the mansion, Catherine was paralyzed in front of the plasma TV, her glass of expensive wine forgotten in her trembling hand, the red liquid dangerously close to spilling over the edge. Her face, always so perfectly composed, now contorted into a mask of pure terror as she watched her empire of lies crumble live before millions of viewers. Alexander's ghostly voice, revealing every detail of her crimes, filled the living room like a curse, making her entire body tremble uncontrollably. With a sudden motion, she dropped the glass, shattering it against the marble floor, the red wine spreading at her feet. Her fingers, once firm and controlled, now frantically ran through her phone, trying to call her contacts. Lawyers, bought cops, influential politicians, but each call only led to voicemail. It was as if the whole world already knew she was finished, and no one wanted to be associated with her imminent downfall. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the empty mansion, making Catherine jump. Through the security cameras, she could see a crowd forming in front of the gates. Journalists with their cameras, onlookers with their phones pointed, and more alarmingly, police cars were starting to arrive. Her empire, built with such meticulousness through lies, manipulation, and crime, was crumbling in a matter of minutes. On television, Lauren Spencer continued her broadcast, and the image of Valerie, that little girl she had so terribly underestimated, remained as a living accusation of her crimes. In her growing desperation, Catherine ran to the office that once belonged to Alexander, her high heels frantically clicking against the floor as she tried to gather important documents and valuable jewelry into her designer bag. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the papers, dropping several in the process. The sound of sirens grew louder and louder, and she could hear voices rising in volume from outside. The siege was closing in around her like an inexorable trap. Her eyes, wide in panic, scanned one last time that mansion she had conquered through crime. The imposing columns and luxurious furniture, which once represented her triumph, now seemed to lose their luster, becoming mere worthless objects in the face of her life's impending collapse. Every detail that had once been a symbol of her power now carried the weight of her imminent downfall. The silence of the house was broken only by the low sound of the television, which still remained on. The bluish lights from the screen flickered against the white walls, reflecting the face she most feared seeing at that moment, her own. Catherine's name appeared in bold letters, accompanied by the brutal and inescapable caption, "The police are already on their way to arrest her." Her heart pounded in her chest, her cold hands gripped her arms at her sides, and her mind spun in search of an escape that no longer existed. The echo of the reporter's voice seemed to reverberate in the empty space, each word increasing her sense of suffocation. Then, the crash. The sound of gates being broken down shattered the mansion's silence, reverberating through the corridors like a thunderclap announcing the end. Then, heavy footsteps invaded the property, each thud against the floor a reminder that there was no going back. That was the last thing Catherine registered before her world of lies finally imploded completely. Within minutes of the live broadcast, social media exploded with the video of little Valerie invading Lauren Spencer's show. The recording of Alexander's confession spread like wildfire, shared thousands of times across different platforms. Excerpts from the broadcast were endlessly repeated on news channels from every station, which interrupted their regular programming to cover the unfolding of that drama that had captured the attention of the entire country. Valerie's angelic face contrasting with the gravity of her accusations, coupled with the irrefutable proof of her father's voice, created a narrative so powerful that it was impossible to remain indifferent. Messages like "Justice for Valerie" and "Catherine Criminal" dominated the trending topics, with millions of posts expressing outrage and demanding exemplary punishment for the criminal stepmother. Celebrities, influencers, and public figures began to speak out, sharing the story and demanding that authorities take immediate action. The uproar on social media was so intense that even politicians and judicial authorities found themselves forced to make statements, promising rigorous investigations and swift justice. Groups of protesters began spontaneously forming in front of the mansion where Catherine was located, their signs and chants of protest being broadcast live by dozens of news channels. The crowd grew by the minute. People from all social classes united in a common cry for justice. Mothers hugged their children as they watched the replay of the broadcast on their phones, tears streaming down their faces as they imagined the suffering of that child who, alone, had faced so much evil to reveal the truth about her father's death. The journalists covering the case began uncovering other irregularities in Catherine's past. Special reports revealed a pattern of suspicious behavior, other previous marriages to wealthy men, mysterious deaths, fortunes that disappeared. Valerie's case had opened a Pandora's box, exposing a web of crimes that stretched back years. Criminal law experts were summoned to comment live, explaining the possible punishments for each of the revealed crimes: premeditated crime against life, document forgery, misappropriation, unlawful deprivation of a minor's liberty. On social media, internet users began sharing their own stories of abuse and injustice, inspired by Valerie's courage. The little girl had become a symbol of resistance, her story touching a deep nerve in society. Videos analyzing Alexander's recording went viral, with audio forensics experts confirming its authenticity. Excerpts from the confession were turned into memes and reposted thousands of times, always accompanied by messages of support for Valerie and repudiation of Catherine. Lauren Spencer, who had become a fundamental part of that story by giving Valerie a voice, continued her special coverage, following each new development with a mix of professionalism and genuine emotion. Her show, once centered on entertainment and light interviews, had transformed into the epicenter of a social revolution, a true public tribunal where the truth finally emerged, destroying the empire of lies that had kept Valerie silent for so long. Viewership skyrocketed to unprecedented levels. Renowned newspapers reproduced the most impactful excerpts from the interview. Authorities began to be pressured to act, and even public figures spoke out on social media, declaring support for the girl who had defied a corrupt system. The story transcended the boundaries of television and took to the streets, inspiring peaceful protests demanding justice, while hashtags and posts flooded social media. At that moment, Lauren Spencer was more than just a host. She was the voice of a movement. "This is not just the story of a brave little girl," she declared during a special broadcast, her steady gaze fixed on the camera, reflecting the gravity of the situation. "It is a wake-up call about how our society often fails to protect its children, to listen to their voices, to believe their allegations." She paused, letting the words echo in the silence of the studio, where the audience watched attentively, absorbing every syllable. Today, thanks to Valerie's courage, that begins to change. The reaction was immediate. Applause echoed through the studio, some people visibly emotional. Outside, in the homes of millions of viewers, Lauren's words ignited a feeling of outrage and hope. Valerie was no longer just a victim. She had become the face of a larger battle, and her struggle now belonged to all those who believed that the truth needed to prevail. With a blonde wig and sunglasses, Catherine hurried across the lobby of the international airport, dragging a single carry-on suitcase containing her most valuable belongings. Her hands, once always steady and elegant, now trembled as she clutched a fake passport, her last desperate gambit to escape the storm brewing around her. The heel of her expensive boots echoed on the polished floor as she tried to maintain her composure, even feeling that every person passing by could recognize her, even knowing that her face was being displayed on every airport television in the breaking news. In her tormented mind, she was still trying to process how everything had crumbled so rapidly. Just a few hours earlier, she was the absolute ruler of an empire built on carefully planned lies and crimes. Now she was a desperate fugitive, running against time as the webs of her own web of lies closed in around her. The flight to a country without an extradition agreement would depart in 40 minutes. If she managed to get through passport control, she would be free. Her fingers gripped the strap of the bag, where she kept jewelry and enough money to start a new life far away from there. As she approached passport control, Catherine felt her heart race even more as she saw the officers checking documents with more attention than usual. A drop of sweat trickled down her forehead as she mentally rehearsed the story she had created for her new identity. It was then that she noticed something strange. The agents seemed more alert, exchanging meaningful glances with each other. A movement in the corner of her eye caught her attention. Plainclothes officers were beginning to position themselves discreetly at strategic points in the lobby. When she tried to turn around, it was too late. Like a net closing in on its prey, the officers moved in perfect synchrony. "Mrs. Catherine," the firm voice of the delegate sounded behind her. "Or should I say, Mrs. Catherine Vargas? Or perhaps you prefer Mrs. Catherine Martinez? We have records of several names that you have used over the years." The officer's ironic smile made it clear that they knew everything, not only about Alexander's tragedy, but about all her previous crimes that were now coming to light. In a last act of desperation, Catherine tried to maintain her indignant socialite facade. "This is an outrage, a misunderstanding. You can't believe the fantasies of a disturbed child." But her voice, once so controlled and seductive, now sounded shrill and hysterical. The delegate merely shook his head as he pulled a tablet from his briefcase. "We have Alexander's recording, Ma'am Catherine. And not only that, we have the reopened toxicology reports, the forged documents found on your computer, testimonies from former employees, records of suspicious bank transfers, and most importantly, we have the courageous testimony of a 9-year-old girl who, even terrified, did not give up on seeking justice for her father." The passengers passing through the lobby began to recognize her, even with the carefully chosen disguise to avoid exactly that kind of exposure. The silk scarf covering part of her face, the dark glasses, and the expensive coat were not enough to hide her from the public fury that was already burning out there. Murmurs grew amid the usual airport hubbub, quickly turning into exclamations and whispers. Cell phones were raised within seconds, their cameras focused on the woman who, until recently, was synonymous with power and influence. Now she trembled before the flashes and curious glances, her fragile body under the inevitable weight of what she had done. The police, cold and meticulous, did not hesitate. "Catherine, you are under arrest." The words, laden with an undeniable authority, echoed like a final verdict. The metallic click of the handcuffs closing around her delicate wrists was a sound that pierced her ears like thunder. Her breathing became labored, her mind spinning in despair. So many years of manipulation, of absolute control, reduced to nothing in a matter of days. Every calculated step, every meticulously planned lie, all crumbling before an audience that now watched, judged, and celebrated. The empire of lies she had built over the years with surgical precision collapsed completely before the cameras of the curious onlookers who recorded her downfall. No influence could save her now. No farce would resist the avalanche of evidence that was already circulating across the country. The last thing Catherine saw before being led out of the airport was her own face on the television screens, scattered throughout the lobby. Her image, once a symbol of sophistication and status, now shared space with another, Valerie's. The little warrior who alone had managed to bring down her house of cards. Our crowd had already formed around the scene. Dozens of cell phones raised, capturing the moment when the powerful socialite, now with her makeup smeared by tears of despair, was finally exposed to the world. Her blonde wig, disheveled during the police approach, hung sadly to one side, revealing strands of her natural hair and completing the image of her downfall. The unfolding scene seemed straight out of a movie, police officers in strategic positions, television cameras appearing seemingly out of nowhere, and at the center of it all, The woman who just hours ago was the personification of elegance and power, now reduced to a common criminal being brought to justice. The flashes of the cameras illuminated her face, contorted in a mask of fury and fear, each photographic burst freezing for posterity the exact moment of her fall. The people around, recognizing her from recent news, began to shout and point, some even applauding as the officers led her towards the exit. The delegate, with a rigid posture and an implacable demeanor, maintained his professional composure, even amidst the true media circus that formed around the scene. The hubbub at the airport grew every second, dozens of cell phones raised, flashes blinking incessantly, as journalists squeezed between passengers to capture the exact moment of Catherine's ruin. With the microphone in hand and his firm voice amplified by the loudspeakers, he began reading the arrest warrant. Each word was a precise blow, resonating through the crowded lobby like nails being hammered into the coffin of Catherine's reputation. Mrs. Catherine Vasquez, we are arresting you for the crimes of document forgery, misappropriation of funds taking a life, unlawful detainment of a minor. The list went on, and with each new accusation read, Catherine's expression unraveled a little more. Her shoulders, once held high with arrogance, began to slump, as if the weight of her own crimes was finally crushing her. The gleam of superiority in her gaze gave way to a silent terror, a paralyzing dread that prevented her from even protesting. The murmurs among the passengers became audible, some whispering indignantly, others recording every detail of the downfall of the woman who once considered herself untouchable. The officers held her arms firmly, and the click of the handcuffs as they closed around her wrists echoed like a final verdict. There was no more escape, no more manipulations or lies that could save her. The last remnant of arrogance left her gaze, replaced by the terrifying realization that her life of crime had finally come to an end, and this time the whole world was watching. Aunt Claire's house was exactly the opposite of the mansion where Valerie had lived her last months of torment. The cozy two-story home, with its pastel-colored walls and a garden full of sunflowers, emanated a sense of peace that the girl had not experienced in a long time. The aroma of freshly baked cookies constantly filled the rooms, and the sound of her aunt's sincere laughter echoed through the rooms like a comforting melody. It was as if every detail of that place had been designed to heal the invisible wounds that the past months had left on her heart. The adaptation to her new life happened gradually, with Claire demonstrating infinite patience, with the moments of sadness and fear that still haunted her granddaughter niece. The nights of nightmares, which were initially frequent, became increasingly rare, replaced by peaceful dreams cradled by the genuine affection of her new guardian. Your father and I were very close," Claire would recount during their long conversations on the garden swing. "He would be so proud to see the warrior you have become, my little one." The visit from Lauren Spencer, a few weeks after the events that shocked the country, brought a special moment of recognition. The host, who had become a sort of modern fairy godmother in Valerie's life, arrived carrying not only gifts but also messages from thousands of people who had been moved by her story. "For you can't imagine how many letters we received," said Lauren, her eyes welling with emotion as she handed over a box filled with drawings and cards. "Your courage inspired the whole country, Valerie. You showed that even the smallest voice can make a difference when fighting for the truth." Returning to school was another important chapter in her recovery journey. The first days were challenging. Everyone knew her story, and curious glances followed her through the hallways. But unlike what she feared, Valerie found not judgment, but admiration and solidarity. Her new classmates welcomed her with a kindness that surprised her, and soon she found herself participating in study groups, sharing snacks during recess, and for the first time in a long time, laughing unreservedly during playtime in the schoolyard. The afternoons were now filled with activities that her aunt lovingly planned: painting classes, where Valerie discovered a natural talent for expressing her emotions through colors; gardening sessions, during which she learned about the beauty of cultivating new life; and the most special moments, the stories Claire told about her father when he was young, keeping Alexander's memory alive through happy memories and shared laughter. The transformation was visible to all who knew her. It was something that could not be measured by words or gestures alone, but manifested itself in the subtlest details, in the way her shoulders no longer carried the weight of fear, in the way her breath flowed more lightly, without the suffocating tightness of uncertainty. The sparkle that had faded from her eyes during the months of captivity gradually returned, now stronger, more determined. It was not just the light of a child regaining hope, but the inextinguishable flame of someone who had fought and won. Her laughter, once shy and rare, now filled the house like music, bringing life to every corner. The sound echoed through the hallways, proof that the darkness of her past would not define her forever. Fear was no longer the constant shadow in her steps. In its place came the rediscovery of childhood, of the small moments that had been stolen from her, and that now, little by little, were becoming hers again. The little warrior who had faced evil with such courage was beginning to allow herself to simply be that, a child. She discovered that her story, though marked by moments of pain, did not have to be a perpetual sentence. Her life was not bound to suffering. She had the right to dream, to smile, to be happy. Under Claire's loving care, who had embraced her with an affection that only true love can offer, and surrounded by the affection of her new friends, Valerie finally found something she never imagined she would have again, a home. And more than that, she found the chance to rebuild her life on solid foundations, made not of fear and silence, but of love and truth. Even surrounded by the love of her Aunt Claire and the security of her new home, the night still brought challenges for Valerie. The nightmares, though less frequent, still visited her. Dreams where the dark attic turned into an endless labyrinth, where Catherine's voice echoed like a persistent ghost, where the last image of her father dissolved into shadows. On her most difficult nights, she would wake up with silent tears wetting her pillow, an immense void in her chest where Alexander's constant and loving presence had once been. Claire, with her sensitivity sharpened by the years, noticed the mornings when Valerie appeared with deeper dark circles under her eyes, when her smile took a little longer to appear. At those times, she would sit beside her granddaughter niece during breakfast and share stories about Alexander, not the sad stories of the end, but the joyful memories of a devoted father who had dedicated his life to protecting and loving his daughter. "You know, my dear," Claire would say as she poured hot chocolate into their favorite mugs, "your father always said you had the same strength as your mother, that silent determination that moves mountains." It was during an afternoon of tidying up in Claire's attic, a cozy and well-lit environment, so different from the one that had been her prison, that Valerie found the photo album. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the worn leather cover, but soon her eyes filled with tears of emotion as she saw the images that told the story of her family. There was young Alexander, smiling next to his sister Claire at a summer picnic. There he was holding newborn Valerie, his eyes overflowing with love and pride. There they were in countless happy moments. Birthdays, walks in the park, ice cream afternoons, and laughter. Each photograph was like a window into a happier time, but instead of increasing her sadness, those images brought a different kind of comfort. In every smile frozen on paper, in every embrace captured by the lens, Valerie found not only memories but tangible proof of the love her father had left as a legacy. The photographs whispered a truth she was beginning to understand. Although Alexander was no longer physically present, his love and strength lived on within her. Between the pages of the album, Valerie found a yellowed envelope. Inside it, a letter her father had written when she was born, kept by Claire all these years. The words, written in the elegant calligraphy she knew so well, spoke of dreams and hopes for her future, of an unconditional love that transcended time and distance. "My little warrior," said a passage that made her heart ache, "whatever path life chooses for you, know that your father will always be by your side, even when you cannot see me." Sitting on the attic floor with the photo album open on her lap, Valerie ran her little fingers over the images that held pieces of her story. The dust, dancing in the air illuminated by the last rays of sunlight, created an almost magical atmosphere, as if time itself had stopped there for a moment, allowing her to absorb every detail unhurriedly. The golden light of late afternoon filtered through the small window, painting long, soft shadows on the weathered walls. The scent of aged wood and yellowed paper lingered in the air, bringing with it a sense of nostalgia that tightened her chest. There, among yellowed pages and smiles frozen in time, Valerie finally understood a profound truth. Her fight for justice had not been just for herself. She slowly turned the pages, stopping at a photograph where her father held her in his arms, his eyes full of love and protection. She felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of longing and gratitude. She had fought not only to survive, but to honor everything he represented: integrity, courage, and unconditional love. The nightmares could still come. The painful memories could still tighten her heart. But now she knew she was not alone. She carried within her not only the memories of a past that had shaped her, but also the strength of those who loved her, even if they were no longer physically by her side. Closing her eyes for a moment, she took a deep breath, absorbing that moment of peace. She was ready to move forward, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She would not only remember, she would live, The spring afternoon bathed Claire's garden in a golden welcoming light, while Valerie played happily among the sunflowers. Her hair, now longer and shiny, danced in the wind as she ran after a blue butterfly, her crystalline laughter echoing through the air like music. Aunt Claire, sitting on the porch with her knitting, watched her great niece with teary eyes of happiness, silently thanking to see that child finally living the childhood she deserved, free from the ghosts of the past that had tormented her so much. The familiar and idyllic scene, however, dissolves into a somber transition, giving way to a completely opposite environment. The cold grey corridors of a maximum security women's penitentiary emerge from the darkness, its stained and faded walls telling silent stories of wasted lives and corrupted dreams. The metallic sound of closing gates and footsteps echoing against the concrete floor replace the innocent laughter of the garden, creating a dense and oppressive atmosphere that seems to suck all light and hope from the air. At the end of the most isolated corridor in the prison, where the dim light flickered intermittently and the smell of dampness permeated the peeling walls, there was a cell different from the others. The silence there was heavier, suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of an old mattress or the insistent dripping of a rusty pipe. Through a small barred window, one could glimpse a solitary figure, a shadow of someone who had once been powerful. Sitting in a dark corner, huddled against the cold, colorless wall, Catherine barely resembled the woman who once dominated luxury halls and exclusive events. Her hair, once impeccably treated in the best salons, now fell in dull, lifeless strands over her bony shoulders. The strands, which once shone under crystal chandelier lights, were now tangled and disheveled, reflecting the neglect of her new reality. Her hands, once adorned with precious rings and perfectly sculpted and polished nails in sophisticated shades, were now rough, dried out, and covered in small cracks, the visible signs of days of forced labor. The tips of her fingers were dirty, her nails broken, as if every vestige of vanity had been stripped away along with her freedom. The orange uniform that now covered her body had replaced the designer dresses she once loved, those fine fabrics and impeccable cuts that had once symbolized her social ascent. Now all that remained was a coarse, shapeless fabric, identical to that of all the other inmates. Catherine, the former queen of that empire of lies, was nothing more than another forgotten prisoner, swallowed by the system she once believed would never reach her. And as she stared into the shadows of her cell, she realized that worse than being there was knowing that no one cared about her existence anymore. The corridor of the women's penitentiary echoed with the monotonous sound of a mop against the concrete floor, as Catherine, hunched over the dirty ground, performed her daily task with an expression of deep bitterness etched on her face. Her orange uniform, stained with water and cleaning products, was a constant reminder of her dizzying fall. The hands that once sported diamond rings and perfectly manicured nails were now rough and reddened from constant contact with chemicals, a transformation that perfectly symbolized her new reality. A group of female inmates observed the scene from the second floor, leaning against the bars of the common area, commenting with barely contained laughter about the prison's newest celebrity. "Look at the poison madam over there, thinking she was going to live in luxury with her dead husband's fortune," taunted one of them, her voice laden with scorn echoing through the cold prison walls. The other prisoners joined the chorus of taunts, each comment like a stab wound to what was left of Catherine's pride. The days in prison had turned into a routine of constant humiliations. The guards, who knew her story through sensationalist news reports, made sure to assign her the most degrading tasks. The privileges her money used to buy no longer existed within those grey walls. Her name, once whispered with reverence in the most exclusive social circles, was now spat with contempt in the prison corridors, often accompanied by insults and references to her failed attempt to destroy the life of an innocent child. The socialite who once reigned in luxurious mansions now settled for a tiny cell, shared with 3 other inmates who didn't miss the opportunity to remind her of her crimes. The nights were filled with the sound of distant crying and the metallic creaking of the bars, so different from the symphonies she used to hear at her elegant parties. Her thin and coarse mattress was a constant reminder of the silk sheets she had lost, along with her freedom. "Hey, crime princess!" another inmate shouted, provoking a new wave of laughter. "Have you made friends with the cockroaches in your cell yet? They're more sincere than those rich friends of yours, you know." Catherine tried to ignore the taunts, focusing on her mechanical work of cleaning the floor, but each word hit a sensitive spot deep within her. Her mask of superiority, which once seemed impenetrable, now cracked a little more each day, revealing the true face of a woman who had lost everything: status, power, freedom, and most importantly, her identity. The irony of her situation didn't escape anyone. The woman who had spent her life manipulating and destroying to stay on top now crawled at the bottom, reduced to a grey and inglorious existence. The same Catherine who once walked arrogantly through luxurious halls, wrapped in jewels and expensive perfumes, now spent her days in a drab beige uniform, scrubbing the cold and rough floor of a dimly lit corridor. The peeling walls of the prison seemed to close in on her, suffocating as if mocking her. The smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat permeated her nostrils, and every movement of the mop against the floor echoed through the sterile environment, a cruel reminder of her new reality. The nails that were once meticulously painted were now brittle and colorless. Her hair, which had always been treated in the best salons, was dull, tied in a disheveled bun. Each drop of sweat that trickled down her face was a mark of her defeat, each ache in her joints a silent punishment from fate. The empire of lies she had so carefully constructed had not only crumbled, it had become her own prison, both literal and metaphorical. Catherine had no allies left, no control. The looks from the other inmates ranged from contempt to indifference. Here she was nobody. There was no influence, no bribes, only the crushing weight of routine, the bitter taste of failure, and the incessant sound of the mop sliding across the floor, an endless echo of her ruin. During lunchtime in the prison cafeteria, Catherine tried to maintain her former haughty posture as she held her tray of institutional food, but it was impossible to ignore the malicious comments that followed her like shadows. "Look at the actress of the year," an inmate shouted, provoking laughter. "You put on quite a show on TV, didn't you? Pity your last role will be as a janitor in here." The entire cafeteria erupted in laughter as Catherine, her hands trembling with contained rage, spilled part of her watery soup onto the tray. The guards, who should have maintained order, pretended not to see the constant harassment she endured. In fact, some even took part in the taunts in more subtle ways, with cutting remarks during daily searches or assigning her the worst possible tasks. "Hey you," called one of the older guards, her voice laden with disdain. "The bathrooms in Block C need a special cleaning today, and this time I want to see my reflection on the floor. After all, you must be used to higher cleaning standards." The guard's ironic smile made it clear she was savoring every moment of that humiliation. Her infamy extended far beyond the prison walls. During the rare visits allowed to the TV room, she was tortured by reruns of her capture, documentaries about her crimes, and endless analyses by experts discussing her psychopathy. Her disfigured face, twisted with hatred, at the moment of her arrest had become a national meme, shared millions of times with sarcastic captions. The story of the murderous socialite who was unmasked by a brave child, live on television, had captured the public's imagination, transforming Catherine from a feared figure into an object of ridicule. The cell she now called home was a constant exercise in forced humility. The tiny space of 3 by 2 meters, shared with 3 other inmates, had nothing reminiscent of the luxury she was accustomed to. The peeling, moisture-stained walls replaced the imported wallpaper of her former mansion. Her bed was a rusty metal bunk with a thin, uneven mattress, so different from her old king-size bed with Egyptian silk sheets. The bathroom was just an exposed toilet and a metal sink, without any privacy. A cruel irony for someone who once had 5 suites with whirlpool tubs. That night, when silence finally fell over the prison, Catherine huddled on her upper bunk, her arms wrapped around her own body in a futile attempt to keep warm. The thin, uneven mattress hurt her back, and the coarse sheet was unable to protect her from the cold that seeped through the bars of the small window above her head. The biting wind howled outside, bringing with it a chilling shiver that made her bones ache. The distant sound of metal doors slamming echoed through the shadowy corridors, mixed with occasional shouts from other inmates, fights, nightmares, or just a remnant of despair. This was her new soundtrack, replacing the sophisticated operas she used to listen to on her state-of-the-art sound system while savoring expensive wines. Now there was no more luxury, only a cold and merciless world that reminded her every second of what she had lost. She closed her eyes, but the darkness did not comfort her. On the contrary, it was in this absolute silence, when she was alone with her own thoughts, that the reality of her downfall struck her with full force. There were no more masks, no more excuses, no more plans to circumvent the situation. There was no one to manipulate, no one to deceive. The woman who once calculated every detail of her social ascent was now nothing more than an anecdote, a name spoken with contempt on the news, a joke among those who once feared her. Her empire of lies had crumbled, And in the end, she was nothing more than a warning about the inevitable consequences of greed and cruelty. In the dimness of her cell, Catherine held an aged, yellowed newspaper between her trembling fingers. The photo on the front page showed Valerie smiling, embraced by her great-aunt Claire in a sunflower-filled garden. The headline, which seemed to mock her, announced in bold letters the happiness of her former stepdaughter. Valerie, the girl who moved the country, now happy with her new family. Her eyes obsessively scanned every word of the report, while her nails, once perfectly manicured, now bitten and broken, gripped the edges of the paper with enough force to tear it. The rage bubbling in her chest was the only thing she had left, the only emotion she could feel with intensity in that cold and hostile place. Her eyes, once calculating and seductive, now overflowed with a visceral hatred at the sight of Valerie's images as she rebuilt her life, celebrated as a little heroine, while she withered away in that filthy cell. The cruel irony of her fate did not escape her. The child she had tried to destroy now lived the life she herself had dreamed of, surrounded by love, admiration, and respect. The metallic sound of the steel door closing for the night count echoed down the hallway like a final sentence, a cruel reminder that there was no more escape. The noise reverberated between the dirty, peeling walls of the prison, passing through the rusted bars as if it were a last nail in her coffin. Catherine, sitting on the edge of the narrow bunk, barely breathed as the darkness slowly began to engulf the space around her. The smell of mold and sweat permeated the suffocating air of the cell, mingling with the faint aroma of cheap cigarette smoke wafting from some inmate still awake in a nearby cell. The thin mattress beneath her body creaked with every slight movement, so uncomfortable that it made her neck ache, but she no longer cared. The crumpled newspaper in her hands, the same one she compulsively read and reread every day, trembled slightly between her shaking fingers. The headlines still shouted her downfall, as if they wanted to ensure that her name would never be forgotten in the way she most feared, as a defeated villain. In the dark, she could hear the other inmates shifting in their beds, some letting out sighs of exhaustion, others just waiting for time to pass. None of them paid attention to her grumbles of hatred or the pathetic existence she now led. There were no more flatterers, no more looks of admiration or fear, only contempt and indifference. The former queen of the salons, the relentless manipulator who had terrorized an innocent child, was now nothing more than another forgotten shadow in the depths of a prison, her dreams of power and wealth replaced by the cold and immutable reality of her condemnation. And in that oppressive silence, she finally understood that the only thing worse than being hated was being forgotten. Did you enjoy the story of Valerie and Catherine? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and check out the next one waiting for you here on the screen. I'll see you there.